Now we're going to turn in more detail to look at some of the specific technologies and innovations which will shape the defence and security domain in the future. Shortly, we're going to be hearing from a panel of experts who will give us their insights into what that generation of defence looks like, that next generation. But first, we're going to think more broadly and creatively, one could say, about what that future looks like. And yesterday, I was delighted to speak with Peter Singer, who's a strategist at New America, a prolific author, whose fictions and non-fiction books are widely read in the defence departments on both sides of the Atlantic, and which helped to bring that imagined future to life. We began by speaking about his own family's naval connection.
Oh, wow. So one of the, at least positives of not being able to join you there in person is I get to show off one of my favorite family heirlooms. It's actually a 1939 edition of Jane's that was given to my grandfather, who served on one of the U.S. Navy destroyers. It was brought over for Lend-Lease. And after they delivered the ship, the Royal Navy gave him this as a thank you. And it's a wonderful old book. And one of the great things about it is it captures a piece of history, both in terms of my own family, but also the broader relationship between the U.S. and the UK.
And of course, a story, isn't it, about history and the way that we connect through stories. So let's dive into talking about your new book and the idea behind it. Burn-In is, technically it's about AI, but it's not a traditional non-fiction book. Can you explain?
Sure. So Burn-In is a new kind of book. It is both a novel and nonfiction. So it's a techno thriller that follows the hunt for a terrorist in the future. But baked into the story are over 300 explanations and predictions of everything from how does AI work to what are the planned applications of it, and everything from warfare to policing to hospitals to your home life. And then backing that is over 27 pages of research endnotes to show this is not what we dreamed up. It's actually a way of sharing information, needed information about AI and its both applications and effects, but doing so in a way that's more likely to be read and understood. You and I are both parents, so I liken it to something that I did to my kids this morning. It is sneaking veggies into a smoothie, except for policymakers substituting for a white paper or a PowerPoint.
And that's a very nice way to describe it. And I suppose it's this idea of a useful fiction. Can you tell me a bit more about that concept and the value of it?
Absolutely. So we're calling it, just as you put it, useful fiction. And the idea is that actually research shows that narrative is a more effective means of conveying information that's new or complex. And that's the first value of packaging it in that way. In fact, when we look at people's brains, when they receive a memo or a PowerPoint, only two parts of their brain light up. When they get the information through a narrative, through a story, 4 parts of their brain light up. But also narrative connects to emotion. And as everyone from used car salesmen to politicians know, emotion is actually what drives action. So it's a great way of influencing the target audience. And then the final value of useful fiction is that the target audience often does the work for you. If they enjoy it, if they find it useful, they're more likely to share it with someone else in a way that they would not normally do with a memo or a PowerPoint. So the concept behind Burn-In was both to explain AI in a new way, but it was also a test of this concept of useful fiction that we'd experimented a little bit in a prior book called Ghost Fleet that looked at the future of war. Now I was looking at AI to say, hey, will this work? And so far it's been exciting.
And you explain how it works. Where did the idea actually come from? What persuaded you that this was the way to kind of reach out to people who make decisions?
It actually came out of that prior experience with the book called Ghost Fleet. Now, I had written all sorts of nonfiction and worked with militaries and intelligence community around the world. My co-author on it, August Cole, he had been defense beat reporter for the Wall Street Journal. And yet it was this novel that we teamed up on that had greater impact than all our nonfiction. We were doing briefings on its real world lessons everywhere from the White House to the Pentagon to defense ministries around the world, including with the UK. It even led to 3 different investigations. There's a $3.6 billion US Navy program literally named Ghost Fleet. And so we were struck by how it had this kind of impact. And then coming out of that, what happened is that a number of other organizations approached us and said, hey, can you do that for us? And so we've worked with everything from the US Congress to the Norwegian military on basically sort of creating packages of useful fiction for their own trends and technologies. And it's to even now being able to speak about it remotely, albeit on an aircraft carrier.
Yeah. Well, Ghost Fleet, you were mentioning, I mean, it's about a future war with China, an issue that, certainly China is very much an issue that everyone's talking about in terms of kind of global strategic defense. I wonder if you could give any examples besides the books that you've written in terms of thinking about applications, particularly with defense for this kind of useful fiction.
Oh, gosh. We've worked on projects, for example, one looked at a key area in terms of both competition with China, but other state actors as well as non-state actors in the United States is thinking about critical infrastructure vulnerability. And importantly, as we evolve the internet to the so-called Internet of Things. So as cyber threats change from just being about stealing information to using digital means to create kinetic change, to physically damage a target. And that target might be anything from an aircraft carrier engine room to a power grid, a hospital, you name it. And so in the United States, there is something called the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. It's in charge of thinking through all of U.S. government cybersecurity strategy. It's a bipartisan commission. And we worked with them not on the research of what are going to be these cyber threats merely, but rather how do we convey that to our target audiences in a way that's more likely to stick, more likely to make the policies that the commission is advocating for actually happen. And so we created a package of useful fiction for them on that. It was actually became the executive summary of the report. There was another experience with a corporation that was putting out future trends. We're all wrestling with what's going to happen next. And in this case, we worked on not just what are the trends, what are the technologies that will matter. And I think there are a lot of things that we're talking about in the conference, AI, automation, et cetera. But how do we actually visualize them and what do they mean for the leaders? And so you can convey that in different ways beyond just, hey, here's a PowerPoint on neural nets. Okay, what does it look like actually in your core business? What are your customers, your target audience going to take from this?
And Peter, people might be thinking, how central should useful fiction be when they're thinking about trend analysis and their own future planning for those who are watching you speak now?
So for the people in the audience who are of a defense or intelligence background, the more technical term that we use for it is FIC-INT. So just like there is human intelligence, or SIGINT, signals intelligence, FIC-INT is fictional intelligence. It's not science fiction. It's an intelligence tool of analysis where you are taking that analysis and research, but conveying it through the power of narrative. But just like SIGINT, HUMINT, it's only one tool. No one would say, I only want to intercept the enemy's communications, or I only want to have a James Bond-like spy. Ideally, you've got all of those working for you. So it's the same thing here. It is not a replacement for the other forms of analysis or explanation or even prediction. It's just another toolkit that we should have out there. It's a toolkit, though, that the research shows is incredibly effective, in some cases more effective. And my own takeaway from it is, given all the different forces of change that are swirling around us, shouldn't we also maybe change the way that we're trying to explain those forces?
One question remains for me, Peter, which is the issue of unconscious bias and how far all this useful fiction might risk missing out on important issues and angles and questions.
That's a fantastic question. That's actually one of the values of this approach of combining narrative but also analysis, is that good fiction and good analysis looks at a certain situation through multiple different lenses and takes someone out of their own personal experiences and bias and tries to look at it from a different angle. And one of the things that comes from this is that you try and get alternative perspectives, including alternative character perspectives. Another aspect of useful fiction that you can do is the methodology of creating it. It can either be something that is deliberately commissioned, or it can be crowdsourced, where you are pulling in perspectives from people all around the world, including maybe untraditional sources of analysis. And so in many ways, it can be a remedy to that problem of looking at a situation through only one lens, either a personal lens or thinking about only one application of the technology. To put it bluntly, it wouldn't just be boring analysis. It'd be a boring story if it told it in the same old way.
Peter Singer, thank you so much.